Stop telling yourself you were abandoned. If God had left you, you would be destroyed by now. But you're still standing, still breathing, still becoming. That means something else happened. People didn't walk away because you failed. They left because they could no longer stand near what God was doing in you. This was not rejection. This was separation. What you lost wasn't support. It was exposure. God didn't remove them to hurt you. He removed them because they were standing in the way of what comes next. And if you're hearing this right now, it's because this message is not for everyone. It's for you. Because the season of wondering why they left is over. And the season of understanding why God stayed begins now. Listen carefully, because this is not a motivational speech, and it's not random encouragement. If this message is reaching you now, it's because you are standing at a moment where confusion is about to turn into clarity. You are not revisiting the past for nostalgia. You are revisiting it because your mind is trying to make sense of a pattern that finally completed itself. God didn't abandon you. He exposed them. That difference changes everything. You've been replaying the exits in your head. Not dramatically, quietly. The conversations that ended too early. The replies that slowed down. The energy that shifted without explanation. People who once spoke confidently about loyalty, support, and staying suddenly became distant, distracted, or unavailable. And the most unsettling part wasn't even their leaving. It was that they left without a clear reason. That kind of silence messes with you. It makes you question your memory, your perception, and sometimes your worth. You start wondering if you asked for too much, expected too much, or became too different. And at some point, whether you admitted it or not, a deeper question surfaced. Was I forgotten? You weren't set. You were being protected. Here's the part most people misunderstand. Loss does not always mean subtraction. Sometimes it means relief. Sometimes it means pressure being lifted that you were so used to carrying, you mistook it for connection. What left your life wasn't strength. It was weight. What disappeared wasn't love. It was limitation. You didn't lose support. You lost resistance disguised as familiarity. God doesn't remove people randomly. And He doesn't remove people cruelly. He removes people precisely. Especially when their presence would distort your next phase. Especially when their access to you would interfere with what is being built inside you. Some people were close to you not because they believed in who you were becoming, but because they benefited from who you used to be. Your uncertainty made you accessible. Your self-doubt made you predictable. Your need for validation made you manageable. When that started to change, their comfort disappeared. And when comfort disappears, truth surfaces. Exposure is not dramatic. It's quiet. It looks like distance instead of confrontation. It looks like inconsistency instead of honesty. It looks like people slowly removing themselves rather than admitting they can't stand where you're going. That's seps, not betrayal. That's seps revelation. God didn't remove them to punish you. He removed them to show you something you were too loyal to see clearly. You were interpreting proximity as commitment. God corrected that misunderstanding. You were assuming presence meant alignment. God revealed the difference. And yes, it hurts. Because loyalty makes you slow to judge and quick to excuse. Because you gave grace where clarity was needed. Because you believed endurance would fix what honesty never addressed. But protection doesn't always feel gentle. Sometimes it feels like isolation. Sometimes it feels like abandonment before it feels like peace. That's because your nervous system hasn't caught up to your reality yet. You're still emotionally attached to versions of people that no longer exist. What you are feeling right now isn't loss. It's adjustment. Adjustment to a lighter emotional load. Adjustment to fewer voices. Adjustment to not having to explain yourself anymore. God didn't strip your life down because you were failing. He stripped it down because too much noise was surrounding something valuable. When something matters, it gets guarded. When something is fragile, access becomes restricted. You didn't get smaller when they left. You got clearer. And clarity is dangerous to anything that thrives on confusion. This is the moment where you stop asking why they changed and start recognizing why you did. You didn't become cold. You became honest. You didn't become distant. You became intentional. And not everyone survives that shift. The truth is simple. Even if it's uncomfortable, if they were meant to stay, their presence wouldn't have required you to shrink, explain, or delay your growth. God stayed. That's why you stayed still standing. That's why you didn't start collapse. That's why your character deepened instead of breaking. You weren't set forgotten. You were filtered. And now that the revelation has surfaced, the confusion no longer gets to lead, because what comes next requires clarity. And clarity always begins with exposure. Here's the truth. Most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. Not everyone who walks with you is meant to walk with you forever. Some people are seasonal, even if they enter your life speaking permanent language. And when the season changes, tension begins, not because something went wrong, but because something evolved. Some people can only walk with you in comfort. They're present when life is familiar, when your vision is still forming, when your standards are flexible, and when your growth doesn't challenge their position in your life. They support you as long as you remain accessible, predictable, and emotionally available on demand. But the moment growth asks more of you, discipline, sacrifice, boundaries, or integrity, they start falling behind. Not loudly, quietly. They don't announce their resistance. They feel it. And instead of rising to meet the new level, they withdraw from it. This is where separation begins. You didn't become difficult. You became deliberate. You didn't become distant. You became focused. You didn't suddenly demand more. You simply stopped accepting less. And that shift changes the dynamic of every relationship around you. God allowed them to leave because if they stayed, they would have slowed what he was accelerating. That sentence matters, because acceleration and comfort rarely coexist. Growth compresses time. It sharpens priorities. It removes excess. And not everyone can survive that pace without resenting it. Some people prefer stability over expansion, even if it costs them alignment. You're loyal by nature. That's why this was painful. You don't discard people easily. You stay longer than you should. You excuse behavior longer than necessary. You give grace where clarity is required. And because of that, you expected endurance from people who were only ever capable of convenience. You stayed consistent. They became conditional. Consistency costs energy. It requires character. It demands inner alignment. Conditional people don't fail because they're evil. They fail because they are unwilling to pay that cost. And when the price rises, they exit. This is where perspective matters. You keep interpreting their departure as rejection, but rejection assumes you were unworthy. That's not what happened. You became incompatible. Incompatibility isn't set personal. It's set structural. Some people were attached to you emotionally, but not aligned with your direction. Some were comfortable benefiting from your presence, but uncomfortable supporting your evolution. Some were close because you made space for them, not because they were built to stand with you long term. And God saw that long before you did. You didn't lose people, you lost interference. Interference doesn't always look like opposition. Sometimes it looks like distraction. Sometimes it looks like advice that softens your conviction. Sometimes it looks like emotional demands that drain your focus. Sometimes it looks like loyalty that disappears the moment obedience becomes costly. God doesn't remove those influences randomly. He removes them when they threaten clarity, because clarity is non-negotiable for what comes next. You're stepping into a phase where hesitation is expensive, where divided attention will slow momentum, where emotional dependency would distort decision-making. God will never allow misplaced loyalty to sabotage purpose. That's why the separation didn't come with explanation. Explanation invites negotiation. Negotiation invites delay, and delay is dangerous when timing matters. This wasn't abandonment. It was alignment correction. You weren't left behind. You were moved forward, and some people couldn't come without becoming someone they weren't ready to be. God doesn't force transformation. He honors free will. If someone chooses comfort over growth, He lets them keep it. But He doesn't instead let them keep you, because what you're carrying now requires fewer voices, not more. It requires precision, not consensus. It requires obedience, not emotional approval. And that's why separation feels lonely before it feels liberating. Your nervous system hasn't adjusted yet. Your heart is still accustomed to noise, feedback, reassurance. But soon, silence will stop feeling empty and start feeling powerful. Soon you'll realize how much energy you were spending maintaining access for people who were never meant to go where you're going. This is not loss. This is preparation. Lot didn't isolate you because you were weak. He isolated you because you're about to move with strength. And strength requires space. And now that the separation has happened, the real work begins, not rebuilding old connections, but honoring the new alignment. Because what stays after separation is what's real, and what sips real is what God is building next. You've been calling it betrayal. It wasn't set. It was exposure. Betrayal implies surprise. Exposure implies revelation. And what happened to you wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. The truth didn't appear overnight. It surfaced because your awareness sharpened, your tolerance lowered, your discernment matured. And when discernment rises, certain dynamics cannot survive. Here's what you need to understand clearly. You didn't suddenly see too much. You finally stopped ignoring what you had been sensing for a long time. The discomfort you felt around certain people wasn't paranoia. It wasn't insecurity. It wasn't negativity. It was perception. You noticed inconsistencies before you could explain them, energy that didn't match words, support that existed only when convenient, loyalty that weakened when you stopped overgiving. And instead of confronting it immediately, you tried to rationalize it. You gave context. You gave excuses. You gave patience. But discernment doesn't disappear when ignored. It gets louder. That's why the tension increased. That's why interactions felt heavier. That's why you felt drained after conversations that used to feel normal. You weren't becoming difficult. You were becoming aware. And awareness changes power dynamics. Some people don't leave because you did something wrong. They leave because you can no longer be manipulated, accessed, or influenced the way you used to be. Your silence started carrying weight. Your absence stopped being accidental. Your boundaries stopped being negotiable. And that sips when exposure happened. Not through confrontation, through discomfort. Light doesn't accuse darkness. It reveals it. And when truth enters a space, anything built on ambiguity starts malfunctioning. People don't always react to clarity with honesty. They react with distance, withdrawal, subtle disengagement. That wasn't set confusion. That was self-preservation on their part. Because exposure threatens identities that rely on control, familiarity, or unspoken advantage. When you stopped over-explaining, they lost leverage. When you stopped seeking reassurance, they lost influence. When you stopped chasing connection, they lost position. Then they felt it. You didn't set imagine the shift. You didn't set misread the signs. You weren't set too sensitive. You were discerning, and discernment is dangerous because it removes plausible deniability. Once you see clearly, the dynamic can't go back to what it was. Pretending requires effort, and you no longer had the energy or the permission to pretend. This is where the power shifted. Before, power was external. It lived in approval, closeness, validation, and reassurance. It lived in who stayed and who responded. It lived in maintaining harmony at the expense of honesty. Now, power moved inward. Power became restraint. Power became silence. Power became choice. And when power moves inward, certain people feel exposed without you saying a word. That's why things ended quietly. No dramatic arguments, no explosive goodbyes, just distance, fading, withdrawal. Exposure doesn't always come with conflict. Sometimes it comes with clarity that makes staying uncomfortable. You didn't set to lose your voice. You refined it. You didn't set to lose your softness. You strengthened it with boundaries. And not everyone can remain close to someone who no longer needs to be needed. Here's the part most people miss: exposure wasn't about them being bad. It was about them being misaligned with who you are becoming. Alignment requires honesty. Exposure reveals where honesty was never present. And once that happens, separation becomes the natural outcome. You didn't stir to force it. You didn't orchestrate it. You didn't sabotage anything. You simply stopped lowering yourself to keep others comfortable. And that's when the real shift happened, because once exposure occurs, authority begins to form. Authority over your time, authority over your emotional energy, authority over who has access to your inner world. You're no longer available for dynamics that require confusion to survive. That sets growth. And growth always comes with a cost. Fewer people, but more truth. This is why you feel both lighter and lonelier. Your system is recalibrating. You're adjusting to a version of yourself that no longer negotiates clarity for closeness. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you precise. And precision is required for what comes next. Because the next phase of your life will demand discernment, not reaction. Authority, not explanation. Presence, not performance. Exposure wasn't the end of something. It was the end of pretending. And from here on, you move with sight, not hope. If you want to understand what really happened, you have to stop focusing on who left and start paying attention to when they left. Because timing reveals intention more clearly than words ever could. People reveal their limits not when life is falling apart, but when growth begins to stabilize and direction becomes clear. The exit did not happen at your lowest point, and that detail alone tells you this was never about your failure. They did not leave when you were struggling, uncertain, or questioning yourself. During that phase, you were accessible. You needed reassurance. You were open to influence, advice, and emotional negotiation. You were willing to explain yourself, compromise your instincts, and soften your direction in order to keep peace. That version of you was comfortable for many people because it didn't challenge their position in your life or require them to evolve alongside you. The shift happened when your posture changed internally. You didn't announce it, and you didn't need to. You simply became more grounded. Your silence gained intention. Your responses became measured instead of reactive. Your boundaries stopped feeling like suggestions and started functioning like decisions. And when that happened, the dynamic changed, even if no one spoke about it directly. This is when exits occur, not because people are suddenly offended, but because they feel the environment shifting around them. Truth creates pressure. Direction exposes misalignment. And when you stop performing for acceptance, those who benefited from that performance begin to feel uncomfortable. They sense that the relationship now requires something from them that they are not prepared to give, whether that is consistency, honesty, discipline, or accountability. You didn't become arrogant. You became aligned with yourself. You didn't become distant. You became focused. You didn't suddenly withdraw affection. You withdrew access to parts of yourself that were no longer meant to be shared indiscriminately. And that change forced a decision, even if it was never spoken out loud. The timing proves this was exposure, not abandonment. If they had left when you were broken, it would have meant they couldn't handle your pain. But they stayed then. They left when you started standing straighter, thinking clearer, and moving with less emotional dependence. That means they were not attached to you as a person, but to a version of you that made them feel needed, secure, or influential. God allowed the exit at that moment, because that was the moment it mattered. Growth cannot be negotiated with attachment. Direction cannot be diluted by familiarity, and purpose cannot be carried while constantly reassuring people who feel threatened by your clarity. The timing wasn't cruel, it was precise. This is why it feels confusing at first. You expected distance during chaos, not during calm. You expected loss during breakdown, not during rebuilding. But spiritual and psychological separation does not happen when things are falling apart. It happens when things start coming together and misalignment becomes impossible to ignore. You didn't lose people when you needed them most. You lost them when you no longer needed to be validated by them. That distinction is critical. It means the foundation of those connections was conditional, even if the language sounded permanent. God stayed because God does not retreat when alignment begins. He does not withdraw when discipline replaces emotion. He does not disappear when obedience becomes quiet and internal. The same clarity that unsettled others strengthened your connection with Him. The same silence that made people uncomfortable made you more aware. That is not coincidence. This phase is where many people sabotage themselves by reaching back for familiarity, trying to reopen doors that closed for a reason. They misinterpret discomfort as a mistake and solitude as failure. But solitude at this stage is not punishment. It is reinforcement. It is where new habits stabilize and new identity settles in. The timing of the exit protected you from dragging old dynamics into a new season. It ensured that what comes next is built without interference, without divided loyalty, and without emotional debt to people who were never meant to carry responsibility for your future. Once you see the timing clearly, self-doubt loses its grip. You stop asking what you did wrong and start understanding what you did right. You stop assuming the loss was mutual and recognize that separation was necessary for alignment to hold. They left when you no longer fit into the role they were comfortable with. God stayed because He is invested in who you are becoming, not who you used to be. And once you understand that, the story stops feeling like abandonment and starts making sense as preparation. What you experienced after they left was not emptiness. It only felt that way because you were used to noise. You were used to feedback, opinions, reactions, and emotional mirrors constantly reflecting you back to yourself. When that stopped, the silence felt unfamiliar, even threatening. But silence is not neutral. Silence is instructional. God did not remove voices to punish you. He removed them because too many voices were interfering with what He needed to build internally. There are phases of growth where encouragement helps, and there are phases where encouragement becomes a crutch. You entered the second phase without realizing it. Silence is where identity stabilizes. As long as people are constantly responding to you, you are unconsciously adjusting yourself to maintain connection. Tone changes. Peace changes. Decisions soften. Silence removes that external calibration. It forces you to hear your own thoughts clearly and confront motivations you could previously distract yourself from. That is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. You weren't abandoned in isolation. You were placed in it intentionally. God teaches differently in silence than He does in crowds. In silence, there is no performance. No explaining, no negotiating, just alignment or resistance. And resistance becomes obvious very quickly when there is nothing to hide behind. This is why the early stage of silence feels heavy. Your nervous system is recalibrating. You are withdrawing from emotional dependence, even if you never labeled it that way. You were accustomed to reassurance, to being seen, to being acknowledged. Silence interrupts that cycle and reveals where your sense of stability was sourced from. And once that source is exposed, it can be corrected. Think carefully about what changed during this period. You became more self-aware. You started noticing patterns in your reactions instead of immediately expressing them. You stopped filling space with unnecessary words. You became slower to respond, but more intentional when you did. Those are not signs of withdrawal. Those are signs of consolidation. God uses silence to compress growth. In noise, growth is gradual. In silence, growth accelerates, because there are fewer distractions and fewer emotional negotiations. You learn to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. You learn to wait without reassurance. You learn to make decisions without consensus. That kind of internal strength cannot be developed publicly. It requires privacy. This is why so many transformations happen quietly, not because they are weak, but because they are fragile in their early stages. Seeds do not grow in open air. They grow underground, unseen, unsupported, surrounded by pressure. Silence is not absence of life. It is evidence of formation. You were not being ignored during this phase. You were being observed. God watches differently in silence. He watches consistency without applause. He watches discipline without reward. He watches obedience without emotional reinforcement. This is where character is no longer theoretical. It becomes embodied. You learned how to regulate yourself without outside stabilization. You learned how to trust your judgment without constant validation. You learned how to move without announcing your intentions. Those lessons are not glamorous, but they are foundational. Most people never pass this stage because they mistake silence for rejection and retreat back to noise. They reconnect with people they've outgrown, reopen dynamics that were closed for a reason, and trade clarity for comfort. You didn't. You stayed. That's why this silence mattered. It wasn't about loneliness. It was about independence, emotional independence, psychological independence, spiritual independence, not separation from people entirely, but separation from dependency on them. You stopped needing permission to become who you already sensed you were meant to be. And that is why silence eventually stops feeling empty and starts feeling powerful. You realize how much energy you used to spend explaining yourself, maintaining harmony, and managing other people's expectations. Without that drain, your focus sharpened, your thoughts slowed down, your decisions gained weight. This is preparation, not for attention, but for responsibility, not for validation, but for stewardship. What comes next in your life will require stability, not excitement. It will require clarity, not crowds, and silence trained you for that. God stayed present in this phase not through noise but through steadiness, through the quiet strengthening of your inner structure, through the slow removal of emotional excess, through the deepening of trust that no longer depends on immediate results. You weren't set alone, you were being shaped, and once shaping is complete, silence gives way to movement. But the movement is different now. It is controlled, directed, intentional. The noise you lost was never necessary. The strength you gained was. At this stage, the danger is no longer what left. The danger is what you are still holding. Not physically, but mentally and emotionally. Holding on doesn't always look like reaching out or reopening conversations. Sometimes it looks like replaying memories, reimagining outcomes, or keeping space in your mind for people who no longer occupy space in your life. Attachment is expensive. It drains energy quietly. You don't feel it immediately because it disguises itself as loyalty, reflection, or unfinished business. But over time, it slows movement. It clouds decision-making. It keeps parts of you anchored to seasons that have already ended. God didn't remove people from your life, so you could continue carrying them internally. This is where many people get stuck. They accept physical separation but resist emotional release. They stop contacting, but they don't stop considering. They don't chase, but they keep checking. They move forward externally while remaining tethered internally. That tether has a cost. Every time you revisit what could have been, you pull attention away from what is forming. Every time you seek closure from memory instead of clarity from reality, you delay alignment. Growth requires presence, and presence cannot coexist with divided attention. You were loyal, but loyalty without discernment becomes self-sacrifice. You stayed longer than necessary. You gave grace where boundaries were needed. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But continuing to carry what God already removed is not loyalty. It is resistance. And resistance always has consequences. The people who left were not meant to stand in the room. God is preparing for you. That room requires responsibility, stability, and emotional regulation. It is not a place for unresolved dynamics or lingering expectations. God will never bring you into a new assignment while your attention is still entangled in old attachments. Holding on feels safe because it is familiar. Letting go feels dangerous because it is undefined. But familiarity is not alignment. It is habit, and habit can keep you comfortable while slowly eroding your momentum. You keep thinking release requires anger or confrontation. It doesn't. Release requires acceptance. Acceptance that some connections served their purpose and ended exactly when they were supposed to. Acceptance that not everything that mattered was meant to last. Acceptance that preservation of peace sometimes requires loss. The cost of holding on is not emotional pain. It is stagnation. You feel it when decisions become heavier than they need to be. You feel it when progress slows without clear reason. You feel it when motivation fades, not because you are tired, but because your energy is split between what is ahead and what is behind. God is precise. When He removes something, it is because keeping it would compromise what comes next. Holding on internally is a subtle form of distrust. It suggests you believe something valuable was lost, rather than believing something necessary was protected. You were not meant to drag unresolved loyalty into a season that demands clarity. This is why release feels final, because it is. There is no partial detachment. There is no safe way to keep one foot in a closed door while trying to walk through an open one. Alignment requires commitment, and commitment requires letting go of alternatives. Letting go does not erase memory. It removes influence. Those are not the same. You can remember without consulting. You can honor without carrying. You can appreciate without returning. Once you release what no longer belongs to you, energy returns. Focus sharpens. Direction becomes lighter. Movement becomes natural again. That is not emotional detachment. That is emotional maturity. God stayed because God does not compete for attention. He waits until distractions lose their hold. The moment you stop revisiting what left, you create room for what stays. This is not about becoming colder. It is about becoming cleaner internally, fewer emotional debts, fewer unspoken expectations, fewer internal negotiations. The cost of holding on is subtle but heavy. The freedom of release is quiet but powerful. And when you finally let go, you will realize that what you feared losing was never the source of your strength. Your strength was always in alignment, At this point, there is nothing left to analyze. The pattern is complete. What remains now is not understanding, but decision. Understanding brought you here, but it cannot take you further. Movement requires commitment, and commitment only happens when hesitation is removed. This is where alignment begins to operate instead of being discussed. If they could leave easily, they were never assigned to stay. That is not an insult to them, and it is not a judgment of their character. It is a statement of structure. Assignments have weight. They carry responsibility. They demand endurance. What is assigned remains even when it is inconvenient. What is not assigned departs when the cost rises. You didn't start lose loyalty. Loyalty revealed itself. You thought you were delayed, but delay would have weakened you. What actually happened was insulation. God removed variables before they could interfere. He reduced noise before decisions had to be made. He simplified your environment so your focus could sharpen without distortion. This is why clarity feels heavier than confusion at first. Confusion spreads responsibility across many voices. Clarity concentrates responsibility into one. You now own your direction. There is no one else to blame, lean on, or wait for. That is not pressure. That is authority. Alignment is not a feeling. It is a posture. It is the quiet commitment to move forward without seeking reassurance. It is the refusal to revisit what God already released. It is the discipline to protect clarity, even when familiarity tries to pull you backward. This is where partial obedience becomes dangerous. Half commitment creates drag. Divided attention dilutes momentum. You cannot move forward while emotionally negotiating with the past. Alignment requires closure, not through explanation, but through decision. God stayed because God does not abandon what He entrusts. He does not initiate transformation and then withdraw halfway through. If you are still standing, still thinking clearly, still moving forward despite everything that left, that is evidence of presence. Now the responsibility shifts to you. You are no longer in a phase of preparation. You are in a phase of execution. The silence has done its work. The separation has clarified the field. The attachments have been identified and released. What remains is movement with intention. This is not the time to look for replacements for what left. What left was not removed to be substituted. It was removed to create space for growth without interference. The next phase will not mirror the last. It will require more discipline and less validation, more clarity and less consensus. That is why fewer people will understand you now. Alignment isolates before it stabilizes, but isolation at this stage is not loneliness. It is focus. You don't need everyone to move forward. You don't need permission. You don't need applause. You need consistency. God stayed. That is the anchor. Move forward without apology. Protect what has been clarified. Respect the separation. Honor the silence. Do not reach back for what required you to shrink. Nothing was wasted. The losses were not losses. The exits were not failures. The silence was not absence. It was preparation. And now alignment is active. Not later. Not someday. Now. The next chapter does not require explanation. It requires execution. And you are ready. You don't need to chase what left. You don't need to explain what changed. You don't need to convince anyone of what God is doing in your life. Those who were meant to stay are still here, and what God removes, He removes with precision. If this message reached you, let it mark the end of confusion and the beginning of movement. Don't treat it as content. Treat it as confirmation. Let it settle, and then let it guide how you move from here. If this spoke directly to your season, acknowledge it. Engage with it. That recognition matters more than you think. Stay connected if you're walking this path of clarity and discipline, because alignment is not maintained through emotion, but through consistency. They left, God stayed, and now you move forward without hesitation, without apology, and without looking back. The chapter ahead does not need noise, it needs obedience.